Hi everyone, I'm Gina K from Gina K Designs and your host of Stamp TV. Today on Stamp TV, I'm going to show you a fun coloring technique featuring the Spectrum Aqua markers. Let me show you the tools and products you need to do this technique. First, you're going to need some stamps, and the stamps that I'm using are from the Flower Builder stamp set. I'm using this large Dahlia stamp, and then I'm using a greeting that says, "You're the best." You're also going to need some Versamark ink or other type of embossing ink. I'm going to be using the Gina K Designs Fine Detail White Embossing Powder. And I'm also going to be using the Embossing Magic Pad. And this is a great little tool for removing any oil or static from the card surface so that when you apply your embossing powder, it sticks to only where you want it. Then I'm also going to be using this little die. This is the Mini Fanciful Flourish die. And the Spectrum Aqua markers that I'm using are the Rose Pink and Blossom. For cardstock colors, I'm using some of the Gina K Designs Dusty Rose, some of our white, and the Fresh Asparagus. So I'm going to start with some embossing, and I'm going to be embossing on two separate pieces of paper. So I'm going to begin by rubbing the Embossing Magic Pad all over the surface of the cardstock. Now I have a little extra piece of cardstock here that's folded so that when I use my embossing powder I can sprinkle it in there. Okay, so we're going to start with the flowers. Now I'm going to use the Versamark ink, and when I stamp this large flower, I want to stamp the middle one right in the center, or the first one right in the center, the middle of this strip, and I want the entire flower to be displayed. So I'll start right there. And now I can kind of work around that. I just wanted to make sure I got one full flower in, and by starting in the center, that will create a more even look. So I'll put one here. And then a little piece of one down here. Then I'm kind of going to do the opposite on this side. Put the bigger of the two up here. And a little bit of a flower down here. Okay. So now using that scrap piece of paper, I'm going to get my white embossing powder, and I'm going to sprinkle that all over that strip. If you get a little bit in places that you don't want, the best thing to do is to grab a little paintbrush, some sort of little brush, and you can just brush away whatever embossing powder you don't want on there. Also maybe blow on it first, and that will remove a lot of it. But you can see this one, I must have kind of had something on my fingers, so I'm just going to touch on that a little bit. Maybe use a little more embossing powder there. Okay. So there we go. Put a little bit more here on this one. And you can see I have a little blotch there too. I'll get rid of that. Okay. So now that we have the flowers ready to emboss, I'm going to grab my heat tool. And this comes up pretty quickly once the heat tool gets really hot. And once you see that get nice and bright and shiny, move on. Don't stay on it too long because you don't want to burn your embossing powder. If you have some sort of paper clip or tweezers, that really does help to hold the paper. I always forget to bring mine. Okay. So now we have that part complete. Now I'm going to add a greeting to this green piece, and that is going to be the greeting that says, "You're the best." This is a nice bold greeting. I really love this one. And this is going to go down here in this right-hand bottom corner. There we go. And we'll add some embossing powder to that. Might as well use what I have here. So there we go. And I will heat that as well. A little bit. It's very humid in here where I'm working, so it's kind of sticking to everything. Okay. So now we have the greeting. And this panel is going to go onto this white piece, and I'll put that on in just a little bit once that completely dries. So now my next step is going to be to color this flower using some of the Spectrum Noir Aqua markers, the Spectrum Aqua. Okay, and let me just remove any of that Versamark that's on my spot there. Alright, so I'm going to color this middle one. I'm not going to color the whole thing. I'll show you the finished card project, but I want to show you how I color it, and you don't have to watch me do the whole thing. Once you see one, you'll be able to finish the rest yourself. Okay, I'm starting with the blossom color, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of color just toward the bottom and coming up just a little bit on each petal. And this is going to give a real kind of impressionistic watercolor look, not super realistic, but more where you can kind of see the separation of colors. But I really like that look, and you'll see when you see them all grouped together in the finished card, you'll see how pretty this is. Okay, so you can see this is a lighter pink. It's not that much different than the Dusty Rose cardstock, but it does give a little bit of depth, and you can see as it dries it's starting to get lighter. And you can see I'm just adding a little bit to each one. I would say fill up about half of the petal for this color. Alright, a couple more petals. And then when I get to the center, I'm just going to kind of color them all in. And you'll see what I mean by that. The bigger ones you can still, but when you get to here, just kind of color the whole thing in like that. Alright, so that is the first color. And you can see that's pretty by itself. Ooh, missed one here. There we go. That's pretty by itself. But now I'm going to add the rose pink. And you can use either tip for this. You can use the fine bullet tip, which is really nice to have, or you can use the brush tip because it does have a fine point on the end. And for this one, I'm not going to go quite as high. I'm just going to add a little bit of this darker color in there. Real close to the bottom of each petal where the other petals overlap. And I'm not really worrying about blending because that's not the look I'm going for. I'm just going for this kind of, well, it looks very much like some of the watercolor from the Impressionist era. Almost like Monet, although I don't put myself in that category. More like Crayola. Okay, and you can see though how this is really looking pretty with those two colors blended together. And if you want a lighter version of this, you can always use a water brush and just scribble a little bit of this marker right onto an acrylic block and then pick it up with your water brush. and you'll get a much lighter version of this. And that might look better if you were just stamping this on white cardstock with maybe a black embossing powder or a water, some kind of ink that works well with watercolor, like a StazOn ink. All right, almost done here. And again, I'm going to add a whole bunch into the center. And now you can see the whole thing's kind of glowing. It gives it a lot of depth and dimension. Okay, so now I told you that we were going to cut out one of these mini fanciful flourishes, and I did pre-cut one here out of the fresh asparagus ink. And once I finished coloring all of these, then I'm going to layer that onto a white strip. So I'll do that now. You can just pretend that this is all colored in, and then you'll get the good look at the finished product one. All right. And then to add this, I'm just going to put a little bit of tape on the top and a little on the bottom. And then I kind of want to just lay this in here and wrap it around like that, just to give a little bit of green in there since I'm not stamping any leaves. Okay, so now these two panels are going to be adhered together using some mono adhesive. All right. It's a little hot where I'm working and everything's kind of sticking to everything else. Need to put the air on today in Wisconsin. Okay, and then this whole panel is going to go across and get adhered here, and then the whole thing onto a Dusty Rose card base. Now let me show you my finished card. Here's the finished one, and you can see how pretty those flowers look when they're all colored in the same way. You get lots of depth, lots of dimension, and the flowers seem to just pop off of that card. This is a very simple card to make. You can also use an embossing folder to add texture in the background, or if you wanted to, you could even use a textured pattern paper and just stamp and emboss on top of that. So that is my finished card project. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. Stay tuned for more inspiration right here on StampTV.com.